Well, hello, and greetings from the Presbytery of Grace in north central Texas, about 150 congregations in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Greetings to your congregation and to your presbytery on this joyous day. I am absolutely delighted to be with you, even if only by recording, and to be there for my dear friend Rob Martin's installation. Well, my friends, it's finally happened. Fewer Americans report belonging to a church, synagogue, or mosque than do. Gallup started asking the question 8 decades ago in 1937, and then 73% of Americans identified with a particular religion and a specific local religious community. And that figure stayed about the same until 2000, when it began dropping precipitously. And this year, for the first time, it dropped below 50%. 47%. Now, before you conclude that all is lost and the world is going to hell in a handbasket, hang on. As Facebook says, it's complicated. Look beneath the numbers and you'll find a new generation redefining religious faith and commitment. And among the so-called nones, those who report no religious affiliation, there are nonetheless many religious people. There are many people who were baptized as infants or teens, but hear the church's silence on the key issues of the day. And so, disappointed, they are redefining belief and belonging for themselves. Now, my guess is that you and I experience belief and belonging pretty much the same way. You get married, have some kids, present them for baptism, drag them to Sunday school, encouraging them to youth group, mission trips, and confirmation. And then they graduate high school and you release them into the wild, assuming that they will repeat the pattern as necessary. Right? Only we all know that this is precisely what is not happening. As I mentioned, the new generation is redefining belief and belonging. I chose as our preaching text that old chestnut from Galatians 3, the passage about how in Christ there is no longer Jew or Greek, no longer slave or free, no longer male and female. Well, these words are favorites among those of us who see the church as God's attempt to create a radically inclusive family of believers. Can you just imagine a church full of people entirely empty of any concern whatsoever about race or ethnicity, about gender or sexuality, about national origin or economic status, but in which all people feel welcome and included and embraced? Galatians 3 imagines a church such as this, which is why this passage is so often trotted out and lifted up before us. Only there's something rather significant in the bit that comes just before. Before the text dreams of that expansive church, it posits this: as many of you as were baptized into Christ have clothed yourselves with Christ. As many of you as were baptized. The entry point for that remarkable church is baptism. It's simple baptism. And it turns out baptism is more important than doing the baby, more than a casual social ritual designed to make grandmom happy. Baptism is God's open-armed welcome into the family of grace, where we are fed at God's table and orient ourselves towards nothing less than the reconciliation of the world. Baptism is colossal, monumental, soul-saving, life-giving, eye-popping, like nothing in the else important. Or at least it's supposed to be. I met Rob Martin 33 years ago in seminary. We became fast friends, but then again, Rob was fast friends with everyone with his easygoing, outgoing personality. San Francisco Seminary placed every first-year student in a congregation or other ministry setting. And Rob was placed in a ministry in the Tenderloin district of San Francisco. Now, I came to seminary from Texas, When I thought of San Francisco, I thought of sourdough bread, the summer of love, about hippies and openness. And I'd never heard of the Tenderloin. Well, the Tenderloin is a San Francisco neighborhood with an interesting and remarkable history dating well back into the 19th century. By the 1950s and 60s, it was the epicenter for cutting-edge jazz. So think Dave Brubeck and Miles Davis and Thelonious Monk. And the Tenderloin has also long been home to a variety of sexualities. In fact, some of our country's earliest stirrings against discriminatory laws targeting gay and lesbian people happened in the Tenderloin. And as it happens, the district includes mostly single-room apartment buildings and hotels, which means that by the 1980s it was full of flop houses. And in that day, the Tenderloin was full of people also who had AIDS. Now you remember AIDS. Before COVID, we had AIDS. People were scared, ignorant. It was 1988 and Princess Diana had only just shaken the hand of an AIDS patient and humanized the situation. And so it was to the Tenderloin district that the preppy young Rob Martin was sent wearing his penny loafers to spend a year working with the Reverend Glenda Hope. And Glenda and her husband had planted an outreach ministry in the heart of the district, working with women leaving the sex industry and with drug addicts and, at the times, lots of AIDS patients. Rob told me a story about his work there that has stuck to my ribs for 3 decades. It was time for his evaluation, so Rob met his supervisor, Glenda, in her office, and there they were, professional and businesslike, very Presbyterian of them. When a man barged into Glenda's office, it was another employee of the ministry. He was the point guy, the guy who walked the Tenderloin's streets and identified people that the ministry could help. He made first contact with the outcast, and then he connected them with Glenda and her team. And so he burst into Glenda's office. "I can't do it anymore," he yelled. "I just can't do it. I have AIDS, and I'm dying, and I can't deal with these people anymore. I quit," he howled. And that's when the Reverend Glenda Hope, all 5'0" of her, stood up. And Rob sat uncomfortably, wondering how she would handle the situation. Would she take his hands lovingly into hers and study the lines on his palms and in his eyes, and then say quietly, "I understand. You've done a marvelous job. Well done, good and faithful servant." No. The Reverend Glenda Hope stood up, and she banged her fist on that table with such ferocity that it actually frightened Rob, and she yelled back, "What does your baptism mean to you? You were baptized, and living or dying, you belong to God. You can't quit." And he didn't. He kept going till he couldn't. And I've never told Rob, but that story kept me going. I was serving a vibrant downtown church as pastor when my health began to fail. My doctors told me it was time to go on disability. But I remembered that I am baptized. And so I kept going until I couldn't. As many of you as were baptized into Christ have clothed yourselves with Christ. There is no longer Jew or Greek. There is no longer slave or free. There is no longer male and female. There is no longer gay and straight. There is no longer liberal and conservative. There is no longer American and immigrant. For all of you are one in Christ Jesus. Can you see what those sentences mean set against one another? How baptism leads to this expansive vision of the church, of the people of God. This is a great day of celebration for your congregation, and what a great congregation you have. I've been to your website, read about your ministries, your new building, downloaded your wonderful app. I mean, you guys are really ahead of the curve, and now you've had the good common sense, the Spirit-led sense, to call one of our denomination's most intelligent, creative, far-sighted, compassionate pastors. Your future is so bright. Your post-COVID future is about to burst forward. I qualify your future as post-COVID because it is becoming clear that COVID has changed the church forever. And the question now is, how do we imagine ministry in a changed landscape? So let me ask a few questions that might just spark your baptized imaginations. A friend asked his adult daughter, an introvert, how she was doing with her COVID isolation, and she said, "Dad, I've been training for this all my life. I love it." And you know what an introvert is. An introvert is a person who expends energy when being with people and then restores energy when being alone. An extrovert is a person who gathers energy when he is with others but expends energy when alone. And we Presbyterians tend to be wordy, extroverted people. Our worship services are a barrage of words. And we gather in big social groups to worship and to make decisions and to have fun. COVID has kept us apart. It turns out some Presbyterians have really enjoyed the distance. Some have relished attending worship by live stream and studying the Bible via Zoom and going to committee meetings from their couches. If we are no longer Jew nor Greek, might we no longer be introvert and extrovert? What adaptations has your congregation made for COVID that might be worth keeping? What have you learned about the needs of introverts that might inform your coming ministries? And then here's another thought. We are accustomed to church membership and participation as being in person, face-to-face, in a shared physical space. I see on your website, nonetheless, opportunities for people to participate via the internet from any place they might happen to be. Is there room to plan for and to include the participation of people in other places in meaningful, ongoing ways via the internet? Through, say, multi-city Bible studies? Virtual gatherings of your high school and college graduates and recent college graduates to help connect them to one another and to the faith? Weeknight church school for young parents so they can learn together with a glass of wine in hand after the kids are put to bed? The definition of church membership is about to explode because it no longer needs to be tied only to geography. Another thought. Your congregation has no doubt experienced many deaths these last months, and grieving families have been left without the traditional rituals of funerals and memorial services. What have we learned about partnering with grieving families that might be of use in the future rituals? How do we accompany people through grief delayed, grief prolonged? I mentioned the nuns, those with no religious affiliation, and many of them, perhaps most in fact, are actually disaffected baptized Christians. Mostly they're young, and they're disaffected for many reasons, but among those reasons is that they have not heard the church speak persuasively on the matters of the day, on race, on the environment, on immigration. How can your congregation reach baptized skeptics? How can you speak and act on the issues of the day in such a way that it will entice people more interested in following Jesus than belonging to a church? It seems to me that Galatians 3 provides a roadmap of spiritual logic for the coming chapter in your congregational life. Baptism leads to inclusion, leads to creative ministries and outreach and reconciliation. And what is your role? Well, as Rob taught me, there is really only one answer to that question. What does your baptism mean to you?